Rabbi Lau.
President Jerzy Buzek, Vice President Laszlo Tekes, Lady Ashton, President of World Jewish Congress, Mr. Lauder, President of European Jewish Congress, Dr. Moshe Kantor, Minister of Public Diplomacy and Diaspora Affairs, Member of the Government of the State of Israel, Yuli Edelstein, Commissioners, Members of the Parliament, leaders, rabbis, ladies and gentlemen, survivors. 60 years took the UN to make a decision that it's necessary to decide upon a day which will be a day of remembrance for Holocaust. And they have decided finally 5 years ago that 27th of January, day of liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau by the Soviet Army in 1945. Amazing that one of the architects of Auschwitz, particularly, and Holocaust in generally, Adolf Eichmann, his trial started exactly on the same day, 27th of January, 1961, day after tomorrow, 50 years ago, exactly. The persecutor of Adolf Eichmann, late Gideon Hausner, stood in Jerusalem when he had opened the trial. He said few sentences. I take this opportunity 50 years ago exactly. I remember it from the radio, a live broadcasting. I wasn't in the hall. I was a child a little bit yet. But I remember the words, and I brought it for you in the English language. I quote, "When I stand before you, O judges of Israel, to lead the persecution of Adolf Eichmann, I do not stand alone. With me here are 6 million accusers, but they cannot rise to their feet and point their finger at the man in the dark with the cry, 'I accuse,' on their lips. For they are now only ashes. Ashes piled high on the fields of Auschwitz and the fields of Treblinka, and strewn in the forests of Poland. Their graves are scattered throughout Europe. Their blood cries out, but their voice is stilled. Therefore will I be their spokesman. In their name will I unfold this terrible indictment." On September 93, in Castel Gandolfo, very close to Rome, I have met for a long talk with John Paul II, the Pope. He said to me, and I was so surprised, "I remember your grandfather, Rabbino Frankel Teomim, in Krakow, during World War II. He was walking to the synagogue on Shabbat, Saturdays, surrounded with very many children. How many grandchildren did he have? I didn't know he knew my grandfather. Even I knew that they were together in Krakow, a rabbi and the bishop of Krakow, Karol Wojtyla, of Wadowice. The answer of how many grandchildren, the answer was 47 from my mother's side only. Then the Pope said, and how many survived Holocaust? I answered, only 5. About my age, a little bit older, 42 cousins, including one, my brother of 13 years old, one of the grandchildren, perished. 42. He looked at the ceiling, the Pope, and said, I was visiting so far over 100 states in the world. Wherever I visited, I emphasized our duty, mankind's obligation for the future and the continuity of our senior brother, the Jewish people. I quoted word by word. And we met 4 times later, 7 years later in Jerusalem, on March 2000, when he came. When you read the newspapers, you listen to the radio, you see the internet, the talkbacks, when you watch the television, and some of those people are under the wings of the Catholic Church, even. Probably they didn't learn that lesson that the late Pope wanted them to learn. Can you understand anti-Semitism? Does it make any logic? One of the witnesses in the Eichmann's trial was the very famous author of Holocaust, Kassetnik, Yechiel Feiner, changed his name to Yechiel Dinur. The shortest witness, but one of the most impressive. He fainted on the pulpit after a few minutes of giving his testimony. In those 9 lines of testimony, you can read it today, 50 years later, he said Auschwitz was in a different planet. A planet where children are not being born and flowers are not being growing. It's a too easy explanation for anti-Semitism and Holocaust. I told him later, we were friends and neighbors. Yechiel, it's a mistake. I oppose you. It didn't happen on a different planet. It happened in our planet. People like us learned, intelligent, listened to classic music on the same day, kissing their own children after tearing Jewish babies into 2 pieces. And I have seen some things in my eyes. In the ghetto of Piotrków, in the labor camp in Częstochowa, and later on in the concentration camp of Buchenwald, and on the way, in the railways. I don't know the Almighty's decisions and behavior. I cannot explain. But even mankind's behavior is very difficult and maybe even impossible to understand or to explain. Where was the word? They were righteous among the nations. You're right. How many? I belong to Yad Vashem also. We have exactly, after 65 years' work of investigations, a list with all the details of the righteous among the nations. Guess. The answer is 23,000. It's a lot. In those dark days, not the light in the edge of the tunnel, the light in the mid of the dark tunnel. But 23,000. That in one nation, only one nation, Europe, could be 40 million people. Neighbors of the Jews. Students of the Jews. What is 23,000 in a world of billions? Evian is a good example. That the world was divided into three parts. The part of the victims, the part of the murderers and the cooperators, and the majority of the world, people who kept silent, didn't say, didn't do, until they awoke. And here comes the story of the Jewish state. If it would be established only 10 years earlier, not on 1948, but on 1938, 1 year before World War II broke out. Can you imagine? Take one example, a living example. It's not theoretically, it's practically, facts. July the 4th, 1976. Some Israelis and not Israelis, but Jews, were kept as hostages in Entebbe, in the terminal in Uganda, by the tyrannic ruler of Uganda, Idi Amin. He threatened to kill them. And they were citizens of all the world, because the aircraft he kidnapped belonged to Air France. Air France. 4 jets, Hercules, of the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, the Air Force, brought in the night 7,000 miles away from Israel. The heroes who have liberated all the kidnapped people and brought them back home. Auschwitz is half of the distance from Israel than Entebbe of Uganda. You don't have to go 7,000 miles to destroy the railways, which nobody did it. There were suggestions. Nobody did it. In the last months of the Holocaust, 1945, Hungarian 50,000 Jews perished in Auschwitz daily. 50,000 a day in one aircraft. In one. You destroy the railway. Until it will be fixed, you save the lives of 50,000 innocent babies, women, children, men, elderly people. No one did it. Maybe they would think differently if they would know that there is a body called Medinat Israel, State of Israel. We, the Jewish people, have a lot what to learn. I say always, and I must repeat it. In Auschwitz, in Treblinka, in Majdanek, Sobibor, Chlemno, and Belzec, and all the concentration camps all over Europe, we showed that we know to die together. In spite of all the differences among our societies. To die together, we are experts. It's time already after 66 years to learn how we must live together. to encourage the Jewish state, the shelter of the Jewish people, last generation and even today, to live together and to be aware and careful and make all the considerations that such an horror or like this will never happen against any nation, in any continent, in any time. 2,000 children who died of starvation in Biafra in the 60s, 20 years after the Holocaust. Innocent children starving till death. And you could see the black birds turning around their heads, waiting for the moment that the boy will close his eyes. We saw it. What did we do to prevent it, to save their lives? Those million people in Kosovo, for what sake did they die? 1 hour flight from Munich, and we didn't learn the lesson. This in gathering, I must thank you, President Buzek and President Cantor, everyone who is involved to make this event possible. I thank you, because this event must be an echo to blowing the shofar, we call it, the horn, must be told all over the world that we didn't forget what was in the Holocaust. We didn't forget the lessons. We will be aware to promise ourselves and many to our descendants, children and grandchildren, kids, the world you are now born in it will be much better, brighter, full of love, friendship, and peace.